Welcome to the Business of Government Hour TV, a video companion to our flagship radio program. I'm Michael Keegan, your host. Each week, government executives and thought leaders join me for an informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government and its effectiveness. These individuals are truly changing the way government does business. What is the mission of the Maryland Department of Commerce? And how does the department promote economic prosperity? I'll explore these questions and so much more with Mike Gill, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Commerce. My co-host from IBM is Don Fenhagen. Take a look and take a listen. Download the entire interview at Podcast One, iTunes, and at businessofgovernment.org. So, Mike, given your core mission and focus is creating and retaining jobs in every region of the state of Maryland, could you outline for us and the audience your strategic vision for the Maryland Department of Commerce? And more importantly, what are your core priorities?
Yeah, I'll probably have to bounce back a little bit when I said you got to keep it simple, and you still do have to keep it simple. But if you think about all the elements that ultimately make for a strong economic development environment, and I identified this early on too, Mike, as coming into this job. You know, I'm a Marylander, spent most of my career here, was away with IBM for a short period, went away to school, but I've been here most of my life. And I felt like I had a pretty good feel for Maryland, but I really didn't. I didn't really know how great our assets were because, again, you can't be great if you don't have – you can have a great attitude, and that's vitally important, but you need to have great assets as well. So one of the things that we did from the get-go is to really rethink, relook, reappreciate the assets that we do have, reappreciate the Port of Baltimore, reappreciate our incredible industry sectors where we're either 1, 2, or 3 in all of them, be it cyber, be it life sciences, our strong healthcare system, our strong university system, strong aerospace. Look at all those assets. And then you have to look at the assets from a geographical standpoint because we're a very diverse state. Yeah. You have Baltimore, Maryland, where we have the huge healthcare presence. We have a lot of innovation going on around the Baltimore area. You have Capital Region and Montgomery County strong in life sciences, the significant non-military federal agencies that we have as assets. And then you have 15 counties of our 24 jurisdictions that we call rural. And they all have their own assets. So I think we almost had to do kind of a little bit more than a back of an envelope, a little bit less than a full-scale 14-page, 14-section binder of the assets. And then start to zero in through a strategic plan that we put together, which we called Best is a Standard. And our thought behind Best is a Standard is whatever our best is, let's get there. Let's just get there. That's the focus. So inventory the assets, look at our strengths, partner with, and this was another big part of the strategy, partner with the individual jurisdictions who all have to greater and lesser degrees their own, they call it economic development departments, but their own Office of Commerce. So it's a partnership. We leverage our resources at the state level working with the local jurisdictions. So it's assets, it's resources, it's collaboration. It's really now all of a sudden we are into a lot of spinning plates.
So, Mike, with that portfolio and with those roles, what would you say your top management challenges have been, and how have you sought to address those challenges?
Boy, another great question. You've prepared for this a little bit, haven't you, Mike? No, I think we're clear. We at Commerce, we're clear on mission. But like every mission, we're not a silo. So I think in that regard, the challenge, which we've made great headway, the challenge is really to get proper buy-in from all those other entities where if we only execute on our end, we might be able to get 50, 60, 70% of the way there. But if you're gonna get it in the end zone, there's going to be some other moving parts that we don't control. And I think where we've made a lot of progress is in engaging the other moving parts, other agencies, other departments, other cultures and thought processes into what we believe is important. And all the while, driven by, I like to say, I call him the Gov, driven by the Gov, Governor Hogan, who, just as a real quick story, because as I mentioned early on, I didn't spend a day in government in my life, and this opportunity came to me. The governor, ironically, has never spent a day in government in his life. And I made that joke at an event. I said, can you imagine? You got your Secretary of Commerce and the governor. Between us, we don't even have a day at student government. But it was the governor who offered the opportunity. It was my wife who didn't veto it. And here I am in my I call it, I'm a senior now. I'm in my 4th year. Wow. With an election in November.
Has there been challenges related to the evolution of when you became a department, when you took over? I mean, you are the first secretary. Yeah. So how much of a change in culture did you experience when you took over?
A change in experience from my previous life or change in experience from what I think was there?
The institution, not...
Yeah, another great question, Mike. Let me put down another notch for you. That's your 4th grade question, and we're early on. Now, I think I said to somebody... I thought about it with the Dallas Cowboys years ago when they brought in the guy who's currently the coach, the red-haired guy, who's done a nice job. And I remember hearing him in an interview, and they said, "Well, what are you going to do to change the direction of the Cowboys?" He said, "Well, I can't do anything overnight. Yeah. I mean, my players are my players. I can bring in new coaches, I can get something going there, I can change routine, but he said I got to work on the culture." So I knew that one of the things right out of the gate that we had an opportunity to change was culture. Mm-hmm. And the light bulb that went off like day 2 on the job was I was looking at something, and it said that Maryland had 476,000 businesses. One of those innocuous things. Okay, 407, what does that mean? Well, they have a tax ID. They file a tax return. They have employees. And they range from a 2-person ice cream shop on Baltimore Avenue in Cumberland to Lockheed Martin, to McCormick, to the Marriott Corporation, Maryland-based companies. And I said, but what they all have in common is they're customers. Yes. So at Commerce, all 476,000 are customers. Wonderful. And throughout our 200-plus team members and throughout other departments, we see them all as customers. And when you're a customer, you're constantly saying, how can we help you? So I think it has made the job and the mission a hell of a lot easier to be able to move on because they're customers.
I think that's a good point. I think it's great that you came from the private sector and
my IBM background helped on that.
Hey, that can never hurt. But coming in from the private sector, and then the governor came in from the private sector as well. You don't have this background of working in government, I guess. But you do have the benefit of coming in and bringing all this, energy into the job. What was one of the things that kind of coming from the private sector that surprised you the most, coming in and working in government and trying to change the culture in there?
Yeah, I'll give you maybe I can come up with one on each end of that barbell. on the one end of it, as it relates to people, because I said early on that you can there's a limit to how effective you can be if you don't have the players. The most positive thing out of the gate was, in terms of expectation of talent, it exceeded whatever my expectations were. There was more talent than I would have guessed because we think of government. Mm-hmm. But in reality, these people are as capable as everywhere else. More often than not, it has to do with leadership. It's not that this is a lousy employee who was born with a bad attitude and average skills. They're good people who just haven't had leadership. So the good surprise was as it relates to the level of talent that was really out there. That was very encouraging. On the flip side, I can't really even call it a negative, but I think people weren't accustomed to going as fast. I mean, their concept of going fast was a lot different than my comment of going fast. And I tell our people every day, when you visited me over at the office before dining, you get that nice name tag down in the lobby. I had them put on the top of it, dream bigger, go faster. Because we say it all the time, dream bigger, go faster. Because you show me a great organization, and I guarantee you they have a sense of urgency about everything. So we've had to teach people to pick up the pace. Mm-hmm. Once again, it's a function of leadership.
Yeah. And I actually have a follow-on question to you, Mike, and it kind of complements Don's question about the private sector, public sector dynamic is, what are the characteristics of an effective leader, and what are some of your leadership principles?
Great question. I think humility is a big deal. I think it really is. I respect it in people. Mm-hmm. I think great leaders are as good at listening as they are at speaking. I think good leaders are clear on vision, on their vision, not just clear on their vision, but they have the ability to articulate the vision and articulate it in simple language. I think good leaders, more often than not, would not necessarily make great jugglers in the carnival. Not necessarily. You do need to do some juggling, but at the same time, I'd much rather try to effectively juggle 3 balls and not have one drop than try to see if I can figure out how to juggle 7. And more often than not, if you can pick the right areas of focus, the true ones that can move the needle, there's never that many. Yeah. Harvard Business Review years ago wrote an article about critical success factors. And they said even the largest corporations in the world have no more than 5 critical success factors. Mm-hmm. So I think for us, trying to keep it clean, keep it simple, keep it in English, what we're trying to do.
Would you tell us more about the Maryland Economic Development Assistance Authority and Fund, which is an acronym, MEDF? Yeah, what does it do? How does it work? And can you talk about how it's being modernized and recapitalized? And are you rebranding the fund? Where is it going?
Yeah, Donnie, it's interesting because I had a flashback when you just did your very best to sort of mumble through that acronym. My flashback was I was in the job for at least 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm in Annapolis during the legislative session. I'm with our team of people on our finance programs because they're taking me to they're doing their tutorial with me to try to get me up to speed on all this stuff. And so first they showed me some spreadsheets that reminded me of my IBM days. They just went on and on and on back when we had spreadsheets. And then they started talking about something called MEDF. And I really said, we really have something called MEDF? What the hell is it? And but here's what it is. We've referred to it for almost 20 years when it was introduced. We referred to it as our workhorse. That's a name. Because once again, 85% of the businesses, maybe closer to 90, have 100 or less team members. And then there's a group, then there's another big significant number that have probably 250 down. And then a handful that have 1,000 plus. MEDF is focused on companies to help them grow and expand with the support of the government. And by the way, let me just say this about financially supporting companies. I really believe that the role of government is one of more seed-like capital in support of businesses that have ideas or are looking to grow. So MEDF, which we really refer to internally as Advantage Maryland, it's a little cleaner, simpler. It's focused on capital investment. It's focused on job creation. We cap out at $2 million of what we can provide to a company. The local jurisdiction of that company also has to kick in and be part of the deal. But it's a very good workhorse. We have $25, $30, $35 million to work with on any given year. And we can point to, over the period of 20 plus years, tens of thousands of jobs. And the beautiful thing about MEDF investment, Advantage Maryland, is that the investment of the company in relationship to what we might provide them, again, looking at a 20-year history, it's about 11 to 1. Wow. So we're investing $2 million. There's at least another 22, 25 that's coming in. And it's all economic impact.
Over the past year, if we can make it just time specific, how have you in the Department of Commerce sought to enhance its efforts in business outreach? And what are some of the key ways you do that?
Let me give you a couple examples. We have, within Commerce, we have regional reps. Mm-hmm. We have 12 regional reps spread among 24 jurisdictions. Their mission in life when they wake up in the morning is to be so close to the businesses in that particular jurisdiction, so close to the leadership, so close to the chambers and the economic development people that we know what's going on. So we're there to help, we're there to assist, we're there to communicate, two-way communication, communicate to us, we communicate to them. And then we created something at that same time early on called Platinum 500. I got a great leader named Steve Pennington who heads up our business development team, our finance programs, our strategic industries. And Platinum 500 is where we've done our best to identify throughout the state what we think of as 500 key accounts. Mm-hmm. Some of them are obvious. Marriott's obvious. McCormick is obvious. But a company down in Cambridge, Maryland, who has 14 employees is not as obvious. Mm-hmm. So every county, we've identified 500, not by county, total overall. We have a real structured strategy. Every quarter, we have a meeting. You'd be amazed at how many of the CEOs want to be there for the meeting. And we start off by saying, how are things going? Have you had a need to use any of our services or any of the other government agency services in Maryland? One of the great things about it is we picked up on the fact 2 years ago through one of these meetings, a major player, a publicly traded significant company that everybody knows, headquartered in Baltimore County. We had a meeting with them. The CEO said, I want to be at the meeting. And he basically opened up on what he didn't like about how Maryland was on certain things. And he said, we're going to look around. So guess what? Not only did they look around, they not only recommitted to Maryland, they're putting up a new 200,000 square foot building. They've doubled down on what they're already doing. And I'm not sure if we hadn't had something a little more structured to be getting in front. So I think the regional rep program, Platinum 500, that's made a difference. We also have an outreach program that goes outside of the borders of Maryland, where by industry sector and through other methodologies, we've tried to identify opportunities of companies that might fit in Maryland for different reasons.
Getting into sort of the nuts and bolts, but Mike, what was the purpose and intent of the Commerce Subcabinet? What prompted its creation, and what are some of the issues it's dealing with and some of the challenges it's dealing with? Oh,
it was one of my brilliant ideas, Mike. No, the Commerce Cabinet, I've said to someone the other day that someday when they put former in front of my title, one of the things I'll reflect back on as something that I really think was a game changer, had big impact, was the Commerce Cabinet. The evolution of it was in the Augustine report talked about the need for more collaboration between agencies, things of that nature. So we developed the concept of a Commerce Cabinet. There's 7 agencies that make it up. It's the environment, it's labor, license, and regulation, it's housing, it's Department of Transportation, it's commerce, it's Governor's Office of Small Business and Minorities, it's planning. 7 agencies. We had our first meeting over 3 years ago. At that first meeting with the cabinet secretaries there, I gave them all a goodie bag. Goodie bag had 3 items in it. You've already guessed that one was probably a copy of my favorite book, Little Engine. One was a magic wand, because I said sometimes things get really tricky and it might take a little bit of magic. I gave him an 8-ball. I also gave him an 8-ball because I said, look, sometimes you're called on to make really big decisions and you need an additional tool in your toolbox. Here's an 8-ball. And they also got a copy of
the 8-ball where if you ask it.
You got it. And we always say 2 out of 3.
Yep.
So net. And I gave him a copy about Disney. And I said, we need to pick priorities because we're not wasting each other's time coming together and doing nothing. I'm not into those kind of meetings. So we decided out of the gate to focus on customer service, inside government. I said, why can't we be Disney? No one said, is there a book that says state agencies are supposed to deliver the worst customer service in the world? And we're changing the game. Yep. We're using Net Promoter Score. We have training programs. We have recognition programs. 55,000 state employees are engaged in this. I'll put where we are today, and we're just getting started, up against any state in the country in terms of customer service. Job creation was another key part of it. We identified 120 major opportunities around the state. They didn't all have to be big. Once again, if you're Caroline County, 20 new jobs could be a big deal. Yeah. So the idea of job creation was to make sure that these agencies, and by the way, the reason why these agencies make up the cabinet is because they're the ones who touch customers the most. And one of the things we said out of the gate, no silos. No silos. It is seamless between agencies. We work together. The other thing we said early on, if you have a significant project, and in the good old days of government being government, and it takes you 4 years before you're cutting the ribbon, why can't we cut the ribbon in 18 months? Right. Things don't have to sit in an in basket forever. So I think we've really also reduced the amount of time it takes to go from a cool idea to Peter Franchot being happy because new tax revenues are showing up in Annapolis. Commerce cabinets made a difference.
Mike, building the Maryland brand is key to the department's mission. To that end, would you tell us more about the Maryland Marketing Partnership and how it works, and how does it attract and grow businesses in your state?
Yeah, Mike, this is once again, this was when the Augustine Commission came out with the report in the beginning of 2015, they had spent a year going around the state just asking, having round tables and having town halls and that sort of thing, just asking opinion from the business community about what they thought of Maryland, what they thought of how they were treated, all the above. And what the commission heard consistently is not a friendly place. Not a friendly place. No brand. And Maryland doesn't have a brand. So because one of the things I do believe wholeheartedly in about brands, if you're going to have a brand that sort of says thoughtful investors, well, are you really? Or is that just a nice moniker? I'd say to groups of people, Mike, it'd be 20 people in a room or it'd be 100. And I'd say, hey, does anybody ever remember a Maryland brand? And they would say, somebody would raise their hand once in a while and yell out, Land of Pleasant Living. And I'd say, no, that was National Beer. That wasn't Maryland. Hey, every now and again, somebody yell out, American Miniature. I went, well, you're right. They promoted that for about 3 days. Did that one get you excited? So we decided early on, through the P3 concept, we created an executive advisory board made up of some really terrific people who came from all walks of life in private industry and as well as nonprofit world and government. We have an executive director who's also our head of marketing for our organization at Commerce, and we set out to develop a brand, retain a marketing firm, raise money in the private sector, which we've had 40-plus companies who said we're all in. We zeroed in and decided to go with Maryland Open for Business. We played around with sort of clever stuff that maybe had a double entendre, and we said, phooey on all that. Let's just go right to the jugular, Maryland Open for Business. And when you make a statement like that, you better deliver. Yeah. So that became our launch point. And in the last 12 months, we launched the BWI. Everybody's been to BWI, and you see the banners and all that jazz, and you see Open for Business, and you see images of cyber, you see images of agriculture, you see images of aerospace. We're heavy on digital media. We're heavy on billboards. We're heavy on banners in places like the Wall Street Journal. We've identified 10 to 12 states where we believe, because of the profile of those states relative to business, relative to geography, that we want them to know Maryland's open for business. I'll now go into a group of people and I'll say, hey, how many people have seen Open for Business somewhere? I can be in a room of 50 and just about every hand will go up. But once again, just getting started. Because this was not something, Maryland was not into business. Mm-hmm. It was an afterthought. It was one of the other things that came out of the commission. It said Maryland's been trying to live off of government jobs, which is and take this correctly, audience, whoever's listening. That's a losing strategy. You want to look at the government jobs as a wonderful opportunity to build additional opportunities from, not as the sole source of whatever your success might be. So it's working.
I mean, as you get to the end of your term here in this role, what are some of the things you're going to look back on as the department's most significant wins of late? What are the biggest wins that you can sit there and tout towards the end of this year?
Whether you want to put it in the win column or the secure column, like secure as opposed to secure. Yeah. The secure column, I certainly think Northrop Grumman and Marriott and McCormick and many others. But starting with those three that people are familiar with, really mattered. The ecosystem that Mike mentioned a little while back, they all create huge ecosystems. Mm-hmm. You look at a Northrop Grumman, and for every one job that exists directly at Northrop Grumman, which is roughly 10,000 team members in the state of Maryland, it adds another 2 to 2.2 jobs on top of that. So I think the securing of those iconic firms for the long term, that was a big deal. But then you look at things like GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, Life Sciences. They're in Montgomery County. They're a major player in the area of immunization and things of that nature. And about 3 years ago, I signed an NDA, and the next thing I know, I walked into a conference room, and there's about 5 GSX people saying, we intend to create the third most significant immunization operation in the world in Gaithersburg, Maryland. It's going to go along with Sweden. It's going to go along, I think, with England, and this will be the third one. And GSK now has grown to thousands of people, and that was a big deal because they saw the environment where they could be successful. That's the other benefit of having concentration, is that you're going to find people who have skill sets that are already set to go and to do something different. But at the same time, when you look at companies like Tenable, that in 2002 was a startup, and now today they're about ready to do an IPO. We broke ground with them about a month ago on a 250,000 square foot building in the Columbia Town Center, major player in the cyber industry. And I think as you go through, the other thing, and I didn't get a chance, Mike, when we talked earlier, but thinking about it, again, as I talked about great assets and what makes Maryland so strong, we're very diversified. Mm-hmm. You see, previously, we thought we were just a place where everybody worked for the government. Yeah. And it is an important place for the government groups. But we're so diversified. We just didn't realize it. Right. I said we were the pain when the people that we've always heard about, somebody who bought an old house and there was some crazy paint or something on a wall, and they started stripping it off, and there's a Mona Lisa. And in the case of Maryland, we started stripping away some of this stuff, and we saw one Mona Lisa after another. So building on the diversification of what we already have, continuing to have the wins in the various industry sectors, continuing to make sure that those who are here are happy, because in a good economy, about 1 out of every 3 companies is growing, expanding, adding jobs. But they need to be here in order to add the jobs. So again, it's been a lot of fun, and we really are just getting started.
Mike, before we end, I want to ask you, what advice would you give someone who's thinking about maybe doing some time in public service?
I'd say don't think about it, do it. Mm-hmm. No, and I think the other thing I would say is I think this is important. It would be important to either one of you if somewhere you're both young guys, you both have other things, this may not be your last gig. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that you would weigh heavily on you if you were to look at something else would be the culture. You'd look at the leadership. You'd see whether or not there's a match, whether or not you believe that who you are and what you think are your strengths that you bring to something is the leadership at that enterprise. Do they have a similar outlook? And if they don't have a similar outlook, then you're probably not ready to jump. So that those individuals who might be thinking of trying something as daredevil as me, most of my friends said, "Oh, he won't make it to year 2." I mean, somewhere up in Baltimore County, there was a lot of money on the line about what the over and under was on Mike Gill being the Secretary of Commerce beyond year 2, and I fooled them all, and I've loved every minute of it.
Be sure to join us next time on the Business of Government Hour TV for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government and its effectiveness. Until then, it's businessofgovernment.org.